I hadn't had my period. I hadn't developed at all. I would get mistaken for a guy.
The doctor didn't give us any explanation of why.
I knew in my heart that the doctor had lied to me.
Knowing the worst is in store for your daughter is heart-wrenching.
I just wanted the pain to go away.
What are you going to do for my child? You've got to save her.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. When 16-year-old Jean Nolman undergoes ovarian surgery, she has no idea her case file holds the key to an unimaginable medical cover-up.
I felt betrayed. I was so angry. I had to go see this doctor and confront him. I knew that my life would never be the same.
Then, when 8-year-old Ashley Mullinax begins to drink more than 3 gallons of water a day, little does anyone realize it's a sign of a horrifying disease that could kill her at any given moment.
Ashley went from 2 or 3 20-ounce bottles a day to 2 to 3 gallons a day. There was something seriously wrong with my child.
As a child living in rural New York in the 1970s, Jean Nolman was surrounded by her large, happy family.
I had 2 sisters and a brother growing up, and we were all a year apart.
Jean loved being the oldest. She liked to run all the birthday parties, and she organized all the games and usually won all the games.
We did a lot together as kids growing up. We were all very close, and we had a large group of kids around our block. And we played every day during the summer and the winter on the weekends.
Jean was just a typical little girl. She played with dolls and liked to dress up in my wedding dress.
That was pretty exciting for me, to fantasize about my wedding someday. I was always intrigued by the dresses and the wedding parties and the ritual.
And while she's preoccupied with typical childhood fantasies, Jean is also passionate about sports. And despite suffering from occasional bouts of asthma, she's in perfect health. But strangely, Jean shows no sign of entering puberty, even as her 13th birthday comes and goes.
I hadn't had my period. I hadn't developed at all. Every day I would look in the mirror and look and see a lack of breast development. That was kind of shocking for me, to see my sister get her period at 11, and I was 13 years old. It didn't seem fair that she was getting that before I was. My mother would constantly tell me, "Oh, Jean, don't worry, you're a late bloomer." And so I kept on just trying to have some faith that, okay, it's going to come eventually. And so going into high school, I was nervous that I might not fit in. People were making jokes about me being flat-chested or looking like a boy when I was 14. I was getting seriously worried that my body was failing me and I wasn't having that same experience as other girls. Their shapes were changing. Boys were interested in them. Boys weren't interested in me. And I was just all alone with my feelings. And I did a lot of reading, and I particularly enjoyed reading adult love stories. They were a great escape. I fantasized a lot what it would be like for me to have that type of grown-up life and a beautiful female body. I would read about all these voluptuous women, and that sounded wonderful to me, especially because it was something unattainable at that time.
While Jean's mother continues to remind her that it's just a matter of time, to be certain, she sets up an appointment with the family physician.
The pediatrician thought she was delayed in puberty because of her chronic asthma and didn't think it was a problem. We assumed that the pediatrician had prior experience with children with asthma and delayed puberty, and so I took his word.
And he said it wasn't unheard of for girls to get their period at 15, 16, 17. Hearing that, it didn't help, because that wasn't going to make me more popular. That wasn't going to make me look any differently in the mirror.
Over the next 2 years, Jean's body remains essentially the same. In fact, the only way it changes just makes her even more self-conscious.
By the time I was a junior, I was probably about a 5'7". Not only was I getting taller, but then I wasn't developed, so I didn't look very different than my brother at that time. And that was disappointing and upsetting. I think that was kind of like a turning point, you know, where there's got to be something wrong. It made me feel alone in my feelings, in what I was going through.
I was getting concerned there was something wrong.
Just to be safe, Barbara takes Jean in for her first gynecological exam.
I was alone in the room with the doctor, and I didn't know what to expect. And the doctor attempted to put the speculum inside of me. I just sat right up and remember yelling out, "Stop, stop, it's not gonna work, don't do it." Because I was experiencing pain right away.
The doctor is completely baffled. Her vagina appears to be underdeveloped, causing Jean immense pain when he tries to examine her vaginal canal.
He was having difficulty being able to perform a normal type of gynecological examination because my vaginal area was too small at the time. I don't recall this doctor seeing anything like this before. The doctor didn't have any suggestions as to what it could be. He said they were going to have to order very specialized tests that were going to cause me to be hospitalized. I was glad finally, okay, we're going to find out what's going on here. While I was in the hospital, they did some blood work and they collected my urine. They did some x-rays and scans. I had no idea what they were looking for. It seemed like a lifetime waiting for those results.
Finally, 5 days later, the findings come in, and they leave Jean and her family reeling.
The doctor said I wasn't producing any hormones because my ovaries hadn't developed enough, and that's why I didn't go through puberty.
The doctor didn't give us any explanation of why.
Already overwhelmed, the Nolmans are stunned to learn that undeveloped ovaries like Jean's usually form cancerous tumors. In fact, the risk is so high, the doctor recommends removing her ovaries.
I was worried, and I was very confused as to what this all meant for me. I knew that my life would never be the same at that point.
In 1998, finance analyst Amy Perryman and Marine recruiter John Mullinax had been divorced for 2 years, but they still had one thing in common: their love for their 4-year-old daughter, Ashley.
Ashley was the center of attention in everything that we did.
She was a great kid. We tried to make sure that whatever was best for Ashley, we followed.
There were pictures of Ashley, John, and myself at his place, and there were pictures of us as a family at my house. She seemed to not even be bothered by it.
And despite the divorce, Ashley seems to be leading a charmed life.
Ashley was extremely healthy. She never seemed to get sick.
When Ashley was young, 2, 3, all the way up to 4 years old, she was just a normal kid.
But shortly after her 4th birthday, Ashley develops a habit that her parents find puzzling.
Ashley would come to me several times a day and request water.
She just started drinking more and more. It was very strange.
She would just refill a 20-ounce bottle of water 7 or 8 times a day, 2 times an hour. It wasn't normal for children her age. She's drinking a lot of water, but my goodness, she goes to the restroom 8, 10 times during daylight hours. That's crazy.
Then the bedwetting started. It was almost a nightly occurrence. We had to go out and buy rubber sheets for the mattress to protect them.
It was becoming quite a problem for her, and I found that to be bizarre. I called and made an appointment for Ashley to see her pediatrician just for a routine physical. The doctor started to run some basic tests, and then we began talking about this incessant thirst. And the doctor mentioned specifically, these are key symptoms of diabetes. We need to have her screened.
Juvenile diabetes is a disorder in which a child's body is unable to regulate its glucose levels. Unless carefully managed, the disease can be fatal.
I could have never imagined when I held her in my arms for the first time that I ever would be contemplating these issues. The implications were possibly that I could lose my child, that she could die.
At 16 years old, Jean Nolman's body still looks like a boy's, and she hasn't gotten her period yet. Doctors are certain that her ovaries are undeveloped and unable to produce estrogen. Now, they've just dropped another bombshell. The odds of Jean developing cancer are extremely high if her ovaries aren't surgically removed.
I certainly didn't want to have cancer, so I felt very obligated to comply with whatever the doctor said because I didn't want to die.
When we heard the word cancer, we definitely wanted her to have the operation.
The following week, Jean bravely goes to the hospital with her mother. And the next morning, she's wheeled into surgery.
When I woke up, they told me that they removed all of the ovaries. It felt very exciting and promising that all I went through was over.
But while Jean is relieved, she must now face a harsh reality.
I was shocked that I wasn't going to be able to have children. I don't think I processed those feelings.
Of course, I was upset that she wouldn't be able to have children, but that was just a fact of life, and we just dealt with it.
And the very next morning, Jean begins taking estrogen, which will essentially force her body into puberty.
The doctors told me that they were putting me on the highest dosage possible for the rest of my life.
We thought, well, okay, now that problem's taken care of, and she'll mature.
I felt like I had a new lease on life. I would be developing breasts and my body would change.
2 weeks later, Jean returns home. And it's not long before her body begins to transform.
My breasts were budding. It took about 8 months before my vaginal opening was developed. My waist was more defined because my hips were fuller. I liked the new body because it felt more female. And I felt like nobody was going to question my femininity. Seeing my body change was very exciting, and I was starting to feel like, okay, I'm going to have this normal female experience, and I'm going to have guys pay attention to me and look at me. I let my hair grow really long, and I would wear very tight-fitting clothes because I wanted to show off that my body was different and I wasn't trying to hide in clothes anymore.
I was happy that the problem was behind her and that she could go forward in life and do whatever she wanted to do.
And in the spring of 1978, when Jean graduates from high school, she feels ready to take on the world.
I enrolled at the University of Arizona, and that was like a dream come true. I felt like that was finally going to be a real fresh start in my life. I was most looking forward to having relationships and dating, and I was looking forward to being sexually active. I went dancing, I went on dates, and it felt really, really good to get that attention. At that point, I thought that the surgery had worked, the hormones had worked, and I was good to go for the rest of my life.
But gradually, over the next 2 years, Jean's hopes of looking like any other girl are dashed.
I continued to grow taller. By the time I was like 20, 21, I got to the height of 6'1". I'd always been very muscular as a child and as a teen, but at 6'1", it brought me unwanted attention. Sometimes I would get mistaken for a guy, and it was a constant reminder there was something wrong and I was different. I didn't have any tall relatives to say, yeah, I could come from here or there. At that point, I decided that I would try to figure out the real truth.
Determined to get some answers, Jean contacts the hospital where her ovaries were removed 5 years ago.
I decided that I needed to get my records, and the response was that I'd never been at the hospital. I was incensed, And that confirmed for me that there is something that they're hiding.
Amy Perryman has just received some shocking news. Her 4-year-old daughter, Ashley, may have juvenile diabetes. Now she's waiting with bated breath to find out the results of a blood test that will confirm the diagnosis.
It is difficult anytime you think that your child may have an illness. This is going to be a child who is crossing the monkey bars one minute and the next minute having to monitor what her blood sugar is.
But when the findings come in, they leave the young parents with more questions than answers.
The doctor came in and told us that Ashley's glucose levels were normal. Ashley does not have diabetes. I asked the doctor if there was any other concern that I needed to have as far as her drinking so much water, and they told me everything was fine.
We really had no choice but to accept the diagnosis.
But despite the doctor's assurances, Ashley's compulsive drinking continues to intensify. And by the end of the year, she's going through up to 20 bottles of water a day.
Ashley would try to sneak water all the time. She'd sneak bottles of water, and I would find them under her bed. I was thinking, there has to be limits.
Nothing made sense. We didn't know where to go with it.
Over the course of 3 years, we went and saw 5 to 6 pediatricians.
And there was never an answer. It always came back the same, negative for diabetes.
Doctors confirmed with us and reassured us that there was absolutely nothing wrong with Ashley.
Not sure where to turn next, Amy and John do their best to manage the strange behavior. But it isn't long before Ashley's teachers begin to express their own concerns.
When Ashley was in school, her teacher came to me and she said Ashley was going to the restroom sometimes twice an hour. So when you add up all that time, we're talking 16, 20 times a day.
When I would be in class, I would always have to use the bathroom over and over and over again. And the teachers would always get really annoyed with me. It was frustrating because I didn't know what I was doing wrong. Why can't I not be thirsty?
It's a lot for an 8-year-old to deal with. But shortly after the end of the school year, Ashley begins to develop an entirely new and painful symptom.
I started having a headache. It was horrible. It was very throbby, like something was squeezing my eyes, and just over and over and over. It was really bad.
So I gave her some over-the-counter medication and she seemed to go on about her business.
A headache's a headache. They'll pass. So I didn't think too much of it at first.
But after 4 days, Ashley's excruciating headache still hasn't subsided.
She's not feeling any better and the pain is getting worse. I knew something was very wrong, so we rushed directly to the doctor's office. He said she sounded a little congested and probably had a sinus infection. The doctor prescribed antibiotics to treat the infection. I felt very confident this was all just going to blow over and she was going to be fine.
But the agonizing headaches don't go away. In fact, they intensify.
Over the course of the next 3 weeks, we went to 2 other pediatricians because this sinus infection wasn't getting any better. And all of them prescribed different antibiotics. None of them provided any relief.
I just wanted the pain to go away.
Then, just when Ashley thinks things can't get any worse, another frightening symptom sets in, out of the blue.
And I noticed she was covering her left eye. I pulled her hand away and I said, Ashley, what are you doing?
And I explained to her, I see 2 of you. Like, you're right here, but then there's another you right here.
Her left eye was turning in towards her nose and looking over towards the right instead of looking straight ahead. I was deathly afraid. So we rushed directly to the doctor's office. As soon as we got to the doctor's office, he's looking in her eyes. He turns and he looks at me, and the blood just ran out of his face. This is not a normal happening. He was very, very concerned. Immediately, he sent us to the hospital to have an MRI. I felt like the wind had been sucked out of me. We got in the car and just started driving. I immediately called John and said, there is something seriously wrong with Ashley. What is it that these doctors have missed?
It scared me to death to know something is definitely wrong with my daughter. I got in the car and raced to the hospital.
It was scary because I didn't know what was going on.
As soon as they arrive at the emergency room, the on-call doctor orders an MRI of her brain.
I was beyond concerned. It was becoming, I'm afraid. What is going on? Things are moving very quickly now.
All kinds of things just run through your mind at once.
But nothing could have prepared John and Amy for what the MRI reveals.
One of the physicians came to us and stated that we have found a tumor in my daughter's brain. And I looked at John and I said, this can't happen. This can't happen to our baby. I just leaned up against the wall and I just slid down the wall.
It was hard. Everything I'd ever heard about a tumor was bad. Just knowing the worst is in store for your daughter, it's heart-wrenching.
For all these weeks, I had said, oh, it's just a headache. There's nothing wrong with her. And now she has a tumor in her brain. How do you go to that? How do you get past that?
When doctors told Jean Nolman that her ovaries never developed, she had them removed. But a bizarre growth spurt at age 21 has left her wondering if the doctors told her the whole truth. And when the hospital at which she had the surgery claims it has absolutely no record of her, Jean flies across the country, determined to get to the bottom of her case.
When I got to the hospital, I told them that I had requested my records and they said I'd never been there. And I made a big scene. And I said, you better find my records. And lo and behold, within a few minutes, they located the records and were going to send them to my doctor. It wasn't traditional in the 80s for patients to be able to get their own records, so I had to trust that they were going to actually send the records to my doctor in Arizona. About a month later, my doctor called me and told me that she'd gotten the records. And I knew by the tone of her voice that there was something important in there.
Jean's physician recommends that a specialist take a look at the file and sends it to Dr. Marcel Cedars, a reproductive endocrinologist at the University of California at San Francisco.
I got very limited records that described exactly what they did during the surgery and kind of their indications for surgery.
While her doctors at the time had told Jean that they were removing her undeveloped ovaries, the report says something very different. In fact, as Dr. Cedars can see from the file, Jean never had ovaries.
When she had her surgery, they took her gonads out.
Gonads are structures in a fetus with the potential to turn into either male testes or female ovaries.
I felt very upset that they told me that I'd had an underdeveloped ovary because, in fact, I never had an ovary or a testy. It was neither. And so I knew they made that up. I was just blown away that they would let me live my life not knowing what really had occurred.
Based on their indications of surgery, I can tell that they knew that she had Swyer syndrome.
Swyer syndrome is a very rare genetic condition in which an individual is born with an XY chromosome but develops female reproductive organs except for ovaries. In a healthy fetus, a gene on the Y chromosome switches the gonads on to become testes. The testes then manufacture two key hormones, testosterone, which creates male characteristics, and anti-Müllerian hormone, which suppresses female characteristics. But in patients like Jean, the gene that signals the gonads malfunctions, and they fail to become testes or ovaries. Some female characteristics develop, but without ovaries to make estrogen, the body can't enter puberty.
Jean has an XY chromosome, and traditionally we think of XX as being female and XY as being male. But it's not really having a Y that makes someone male or female. It's particular genes on the Y chromosome. Swyer syndrome is a defect of genes on the Y chromosome, and there is no male development.
When she told me that I had XY chromosomes, I was shocked. This was nothing I had ever heard of. I couldn't have even conceived of it.
In Swyer syndrome, the cells that would normally develop as the testicle don't develop, and you're missing Mullerian inhibiting substance. Mullerian structures are what goes on to develop into the uterus and the fallopian tubes, and so those structures will develop normally. The second thing is there's an absence of testosterone. All of the things that we think of as maleness are driven by testosterone. And if there is no release of either testosterone or Mullerian inhibiting substance, the pathway goes into a normal female developmental pathway.
However, while Swyer patients develop a uterus, vagina, and fallopian tubes, without a second X chromosome, their gonads never become ovaries.
They really are completely normal women, except that there's no production of estrogen, so then there's no onset of puberty.
It made sense that I couldn't go through puberty because I had no estrogen coursing through my body.
Jean's lack of estrogen is also directly related to her height.
Part of the reason that Jean is taller is because she has a Y chromosome and one of the genes for height is on the Y chromosome. Also, typically growth occurs in puberty. The later you go into puberty, the taller you will be because you've already gained height before the growth spurt. So if she'd gone through a more normal female timing of puberty, then she would have been shorter.
And while broad shoulders like Jean's are common among women with Swyer syndrome, surprisingly, some of her other distinctive characteristics are not.
Jean had some increase in her jaw size. That isn't typical necessarily of Swyer syndrome. I don't think it's typical for women with Swyer syndrome to be more masculine. They don't get masculinized in terms of excessive hair growth. They don't have different muscle mass than a normal female.
Swyer syndrome is one of the more rare disorders of sex development.
I believe it's estimated to be about 3 to 5 per 100,000 births. So it's pretty unusual.
And Dr. Cedars is able to assure Jean that while she was given a false diagnosis 5 years ago, removing the gonads is the standard treatment for Swyers.
People estimate anywhere from 30 to 60% chance that the gonads will have tumor formation. And so the recommendation is once you diagnose a woman with Swyer syndrome, that you go to surgery and take the gonads out.
I was able to accept the diagnosis, but I couldn't accept that the doctors hadn't been truthful with me.
We were very upset about that, the fact that the doctor lied to us.
I think perhaps in the past there was a lot of concern about a patient's ability to accept that diagnosis.
I felt betrayed by the doctors. Why couldn't they have told this to me? I was so angry that I felt I had to go see this doctor and I had to confront him.
8-year-old Ashley Mullinax has been experiencing baffling symptoms for more than 4 years. First, an insatiable thirst, then blinding headaches and double vision. Now, her parents have just learned that a golf ball-sized tumor is growing in her brain.
At this point, they don't know what kind of tumor it is. They don't know how it originated. What are you going to do for my child? You've got to save her. What are you going to do?
The worst case scenario always rolls through your mind. That was the worst day of my life.
They didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know why all this stuff was happening. That was the scariest thing for me.
Ashley is immediately admitted to the pediatric cancer clinic, and oncologist Dr. Stuart Gold is assigned to her case.
Ashley presented to us with a history of having headaches, some changes in her vision, as well as trouble with urinating too much and drinking too much. Ashley had a mass on her MRI in the third ventricle, in the area of the pineal gland.
The pineal gland is a centrally located area of the brain where many vital nerves and glands intersect.
It was explained to me that Ashley had a golf ball sitting in the soul of her brain, that the soul was where all of the neuropathways connected and crossed.
But as dire as Ashley's condition is, the doctors can't treat her until they determine exactly what kind of tumor she has.
We get clues on MRI scans of what things may be, but we never know what they are for sure until we have a biopsy and can look at it under a microscope. We needed surgery to confirm the diagnosis.
It was like living in a virtual nightmare, that somebody was going to have their hands inside of her brain.
Trying to get a piece of tissue, sometimes you can have bleeding, you can have other complications that could lead to death or neurologic consequences.
There was a 10% chance that Ashley would not survive the surgery at all.
But it was explained to me that not doing the surgery, it was about a 100% chance of death.
When we had to wheel her into surgery, that was the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life.
We had to take a long trip down a hallway to the OR. The hardest part was when the doors closed. You don't know.
Waiting for Ashley to come out of surgery was agonizing.
We didn't know she'd make it through. It was the longest time of my life.
With each passing moment, John and Amy's anxiety only deepens. Finally, after an excruciating 5 hours, the OR doors swing open.
The surgeon came out and she was smiling and she said, "The surgery went well."
After surgery, the biopsy confirmed that Ashley had a pineal germinoma.
A pineal germinoma is a rare type of brain tumor that is formed by germ cells. In healthy individuals, germ cells play a key role in determining the sex of a fetus. But in patients like Ashley, for unknown reasons, the germ cells travel to the brain and wreak havoc on multiple neurological systems.
Knowing that this had been growing in Ashley's brain for her entire life, that immediately shocked me.
Germinoma evolves somewhere in the development of the embryo as cells called germ cells migrate to the wrong area and they take up home and grow abnormally and cause a tumor. As tumors grow in the area of the pineal and the pituitary gland, they can destroy the pituitary gland. As this happens, the pituitary gland can no longer do its basic function, making hormones that help regulate the body.
In Ashley's case, one of those hormones controlled the production of urine and led to a rare condition called diabetes insipidus.
Diabetes insipidus is when you cannot concentrate your urine. So you keep urinating and urinating, and you get dehydrated and you drink and drink, and it actually looks quite a bit like childhood with diabetes, but it's not.
For years and years, doctors kept looking at me saying all the blood tests are normal, when in all actuality, the blood tests weren't normal. They just weren't testing for the right thing.
And as the tumor in her brain grew bigger, it led directly to Ashley's other symptoms.
The tumor blocked the flow of her spinal fluid. This caused a backup of pressure, and this caused her headaches. Ashley had double vision because she had increased pressure in her brain, causing pressure on the brainstem.
More than 4 years after Ashley's first symptoms set in, Amy and John finally understand what's wrong with their child. And it raises the question as to why it took so long to identify the critical clues.
Childhood cancers and tumors are very rare. I've been a pediatric oncologist here at UNC for about 20 years. We've seen a pineal germinoma a handful of times.
But while the surgery to diagnose the condition is a critical step, Ashley's ordeal is far from over. First, doctors need to determine if the 8-year-old suffered damage to her brain during the operation.
Although the surgery was a success, we were still not out of the woods. We needed to see if there were any effects from surgery. The first question that I asked Ashley when she woke up was, "How many mommies do you see?"
And I said 1, and she kind of broke down a little bit. I was tired, but I didn't hurt. My head didn't hurt.
It was such a relief to know that she's okay. Right in that moment, everything's fine.
Still, the worried parents must now face another harsh reality. Ashley will have to undergo treatment to shrink the tumor in her brain.
Dr. Gold initiated a plan for Ashley to go through 3 rounds of chemotherapy and 6 weeks of radiation.
I was a little upset that I had to shave my head. After I did it, though, I was okay with it. I could wear a hat at school, which was really cool because the other kids couldn't.
I learned by far that my daughter was one of the strongest individuals I will ever encounter in my entire life.
At the end of all the chemotherapy and then the radiation treatments, they did another MRI and the tumor was gone.
This is when finally I could take a breath of air.
But while the gravest threat to Ashley's health, the tumor, has been successfully treated, she suffered extensive damage to her pituitary gland and will need to take hormone replacements for the rest of her life.
Everything that the brain would actually direct as far as hormone has to be directed medicinally. So her weight is directly affected, her metabolism is directly affected, and the diabetes insipidus, all of that is regulated through medications that she has to take on a daily basis.
The tumor did the damage, but still, we're pretty lucky.
We were told that if the tumor had gone undiagnosed and untreated, Ashley would have probably had a stroke, and she would have died.
Left untreated, Ashley's tumor would have been fatal.
Anybody that has a kid, they're really lucky to have that gift. And to have it almost taken away from you, it's frightening.
5 years ago, Jean Nolman's doctor deliberately withheld important information about her health. Now, the 21-year-old is on her way to confront him and find out why he lied to her.
I was livid. And I showed up unannounced because I wanted to make sure that I would catch him. And I said, "How could you have not told me the truth?" And he said, "Oh, I thought I was doing the right thing, and I thought it would affect your identity, and, I just wanted you to be okay." And I let him know that what he did had a very negative impact on my life. That lying to me was far more damaging than hearing the truth. That experience was so cathartic. It really helped me move on to another phase in my life. After I got the diagnosis, I think I finally was able to process some of the emotions that I probably should have experienced at 18 or 19. Finally, I was able to grieve that I couldn't have a child. I felt propelled to open a new chapter of my life.
After graduating from college, Jean begins a career as a social worker and eventually moves to San Francisco, where she finds the man of her dreams.
Bob and I worked together as counselors, and I really respected him more than any man I'd ever met. I really liked him.
I saw her and was interested in her and asked her out, and then we went out from there.
The first month I was with Bob, I knew that he was really special. I was nervous about telling him about my chromosomal status because I'd never really liked anybody so much as I did with him.
When she told me that she had this condition, I was taken aback a little bit. I didn't understand it. I asked her, "Well, does that mean that you are a male?" And she was like, "No." But the more she talked about it, the more it didn't matter.
After going out for about 2 years, Bob asked me to marry him. It was a fairy tale come true.
She looked gorgeous. She just looked like a vision to me.
I had promised Bob that we would adopt 2 children, and so 3 years after we got married, we adopted my son. A year and a half after we adopted my son, my daughter was born, and we adopted her.
Today, Jean is healthy and living her life to the fullest.
I'm amazed that I've managed to marry the man of my dreams, somebody that I'm still in love with, and have 2 children. My son Kenny is currently 18 years old, and my daughter Kiana just turned 14.
Today, despite her brush with death, Ashley is thriving.
I've been tumor-free for 7 years now. All my hair has grown back. I'm 15, and I'm very happy now.
She's a normal girl again. It's just a good feeling to know that we're going to have her for a lot longer.
The fact that we almost lost her and the fact that we have had this second chance with her, it makes every moment special. The glass is never half empty anymore. It's always half full.